This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people, about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. All righty, I am here first week of 2025 with the, I should say, legendary Mike Vosburg. And it is good to see you, Mike. It's been a while, but I'm glad you're still alive and kicking. There are people who, are no longer with us, sadly to say. I want to start with this by going way back when you were 15, I think it was a long time ago. You started one of the very first comic book fanzines.
Back, I was fortunate enough that in Detroit at the time, Jerry Bales, who started comic book fandom, lived about 25 miles from me. And I saw his, in the comic book, something that he did was doing something connected with comics. And I was real interested in that. So I remember doing a phone call with him, which was long distance. And and asking him about fanzines and stuff like that. And Jerry was like a sweetheart. He was always helpful. And I mean, as a kid of 15, he was an old man. He was over 30. Um, but yeah, I remember it was funny because we talked for about 10 or 15 minutes. I don't know how long it was. But anyway, I got off the phone and I like immediately called the operator and go, how much was that? Because it was a whopping like 95 cents or something,
Oh my God, that was, yeah, sure,
I
that's
know that
like
was a
nine
week's
candy
salary.
bars in that day.
Yeah. But um, I saw Alter Ego and On the Drawing Board and probably a couple other. There wasn't much else out there then. I think there was like what was it? All in Color for a Dime. Um, and um, I'm trying to remember whether Bill Joe White had done his. I think he probably had started his fanzines about that time too. The what was that called? Comics something. Um, and I started.
Rocket's Blast was out there.
I would say Rocket's Blast Comic Collectors was Jerry's. That was connected to. I don't know. I don't think Rocket's Blast came along quite. Um, I'm again all those. That, like I said, as you said, it was a long time. It was 60 years ago. Uh,
Mhm.
so, but I do remember I did a little, kind of like a 6 or 8 page one just to see what it would look like, and sent it to Ron Foss because I was trying to get him interested in working on, doing some work for it. And they all gave me good advice, and so I wrote to, had several people, had them do articles and things, and um, became a publisher.
We have not, in fact, mentioned the name of it, Masquerade or something?
Masquerader.
Masquerader.
And I'm looking to see if I've got one handy here. I could show you. Um, but yeah, it was funny because um, the first thing I had to do as an editor was fire myself as an artist because I went, "You're not ready yet. You can't compete quite with these guys. So you keep practicing, and I'll give you a try later." Um,
How did that 15-year-old guy take it when you told him?
He got over it, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, but um, the other thing that I always find it always is like I'm thinking that by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I had met the majority of the people I was going to work with. What? What? You want to join this interview? Come here. Um, let's get away. Um, I had met all the people I was going to work with in comics, for the next decade or two. I mean, either they were young kids like Len Wein and
Marv,
yeah,
Marv Wolfman,
yeah,
Mark Evanier.
Mark Wolfman, um, or they were one of the things I discovered was that the professionals when he saw these fanzines were just like these people actually know our names.
Yeah.
Um, because I mean, you could sign to work then, but nobody felt that it paid any attention to it. And when I actually, you are so noisy. Um, when I actually started working in the comics, um, one of the things I discovered was that the professionals they had all read them. They'd followed them, and I mean, one of the funny stories I can remember was, every day I'd come home and I'd get my mail, and there'd be 3 or 4 letters in there with a quarter in them for a fanzine, and maybe somebody I was corresponding with to do an article, and um, I'll help you out. Um, and one day I got this letter from this guy named Russ Manning, and I'm going like, wow, this guy prints really not neat, and I'm sitting around, I'm watching TV later, and I'm going like, yeah, I wonder if I could talk him into maybe lettering one of my stories. Our guy really does lettering, and all of a sudden it hit me because I was a major Russ Manning fan, but the idea that he was going to be writing me was like so out of the blue. I'm sitting there going, yeah, and I was like, Russ Manning. And I think we wrote back a couple letters, and he was, again, he was another one of those guys that but the first thing he told me was, unfire that guy. He goes, look, this is your fanzine, you got to get more of your art in it to showcase the show to people. Um, so so yeah, it was an amazing experience for me because I mean it was I was not what you would call an extrovert at the time. Um, So it was all my fantasy life, kind of come true. I'm putting out this. I'm doing kind of my own comic book stuff. I did when I was a kid. My friend Fred Jackson and myself did these little homemade comics, you know, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
um,
I know
we
about
trade
that.
them back and forth, and um, I used to call them my 2 minute comics because it would take me about 2 minutes to do a page. It's quality was not one of my aspirations at the time.
I know all about that. In the back of eighth grade math class, right? Since it was so boring, you know, a couple of friends and I would sit down and do it like a daily comic strip.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well,
I remember taking a spelling test when I was like in fifth and sixth, or probably about fifth grade, and I was done with it. So I was doodling on the side of the paper, and I remember the nun coming by and going, "That's very nice, but will you ever get a job doing that?" And I've always wanted to go back in my time machine and go, "Hey, I did."
yeah, good for
uh,
you. There were what, 7, 8 issues that you
I did 6.
6.
I did like some other stuff. I mean, it was like, you know, the fanzines were great because the other thing in the Detroit area, there were a whole slew of guys that I met, and we're all doing, had aspirations to draw comics professionally. Um, so you had like, Al Milgram and Jim Starlin, Rich
Mhm.
Buckler, Keith Pollard, Arville Jones. God, who else was in there?
The Detroit Mob.
The Detroit Mob,
Yeah,
Tom Orzechowski, um, with Terry Austin. I mean, I'm sure I'm missing guys because they were just like there seemed to be no shortage. And when I started out, they were a big help. I mean, it was I think it was probably Buckler and Starlin and Milgram were working about that time. So I mean, like, when I go into the city, I would stay with Alan, and they always, like, took me around to the different um, you know to Marvel or DC, and introduced me to people, and got a chance to show my portfolio then, and
You worked for Marvel and DC both once you
right,
got into it, right? Do you remember what your very first job was and with
yeah.
which?
Um, Actually, my before I ever got into traditional comics, I did a few jobs for Underground Comics, which
Oh,
was actually a way to get a way to get your work printed and see what was going to happen to it in the printing process. Um, and it also, you
you
know,
worked with Tim Veitch on something.
right. I think I worked with I think Dennis Kitchen did two or three of published two or three of my stories, and um, I remember sending off one time a story to Richard Corbin, who was doing some of the like slow death funnies, I think, or maybe some of those, and um, he sent me this very nice letter back with this, which he said, I hope you don't mind, but in a critique of your work, you haven't really decided whether you're doing a two-dimensional poster design that's going to be flat on the page, or trying to create the illusion of a fully rounded three-dimensional figure. And it was just like, wow. I mean, because I would think I was working in comics at the time, and none of my editors ever told me stuff like that. They didn't point out, like, okay, Joe Orlando was the only one, basically, who was an artist. I mean,
Mhm.
like, for the most people, it was, well, look at this guy, or do this. Um, so
Story
getting
driven.
this comment from Richard Corbin was a big help, and I always regret I never did get a chance to meet him. I'm sure I wrote back and thanked him a couple times, but I never got a chance to meet him or talk with him, and tell him, like, yeah, yeah, I really took your advice to heart, because if you look at my back wall back over there, you can see all those black books there.
Hmm.
That's 30 years of life drawing sketchbooks.
Oh,
Every week I go to a life drawing class, and on the other side are, a bunch of sketchbooks. You're sitting down, you're doodling, and so um, once when I got a job in comics, I knew absolutely nothing about drawing. I mean, um, the really basics of, I knew how to copy other people's work, but I knew nothing about drawing from life, or kind of. I mean, I'm sure I'd done some drawings like that, but it wasn't really a focus of mine. And when I got my first comics job, I remember thinking, like, boy, I better learn how to draw now. And so I've spent the last 60 years trying to catch up from uh, that.
oh my goodness. Didn't you do something for Carlton Comics at
I
some
worked for, I said, my very first jobs were actually for Gold Key,
Gold Key?
for an editor named Bob Kuhn, and he was very funny because he's looking at my work, and he goes, well, I don't know anything about comics, but you seem like a nice young man, so I'll give you a story. And my first thought was, like, you're right, you don't know anything about comics if you're hiring me, So um, so I did two or three stories there, which was, again, it was great because it got my foot in the door. And once you could tell people, yes, I'm working here, I'm working, and it's like, then they started to take you a little more seriously. Um, and I think I was already working for Marvel Comics when I did uh, probably a handful, maybe five or six stories, all for Charlton. Um, but working for Charlton, I got to pencil and ink it myself, which was my real goal as an artist. Because when you worked in comics, you got stereotype. You're a penciler, you're an inker, whatever. Um, and um, there was house styles, so they wanted you to look exactly like the house style if you're going to do it. And um, I had too many other influences that um, that I was looking at the time. I remember Joe Orlando used to just to give me a hard time. He go, like, "You're looking at those Europeans too much." I'm going, well, because they're really good. It's so I mean, guys like Mobius and Druye and Paul Guillaume and Topi and I mean just the list goes on of these incredible cartoonists. Um, but they weren't doing stuff like with the Neil Adams inking style or Joe Sinnott inking style. So um, that kind of thing. Um, and
When
I was
did you,
also looking at a lot of comic strips. So I mean, my idol at the time, I mean, my two of them was like Joe Kubert, but Leonard Starr was my other one
yeah, on stage.
on stage, and um, so those, and I used to think their work is so different, and I look at it now and realize they're basically doing the same thing, but Leonard used a little slicker tools and or slicker approach.
Yeah,
Uh,
Joe's work tended to be a little scratchier, but more dynamic.
Spontaneous, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, when did you feel confident enough to start doing something like Lori Lovecraft?
It actually happened in the 90s. I was doing a lot of, animation. Um, I moved out to LA in 1984, and at that point, kind of the art world opened up for me because there were advertising jobs. There were you work in animation. Um, I hadn't got started in it yet, but I mean, like there was there was traditional storyboarding, um, and so I was doing more. I think I had a regular job, couple in animation, and I had a friend, his name uh, Kruger, um, and
Oh, I know who you're talking about, Ken Kruger.
Ken Kruger. Thank you.
Yeah,
And he was the distributor. I mean, he had a distributorship, and he had these boxes of books. He goes, Mike, you should do your own comic. In fact, if you do it, I'll publish it. I went, yeah, okay. So, it took me a year or two, and by the time I got back, Ken had already stopped doing things. But I went, well, I'm going to continue with this. Um, the advantage I had was it gave me time to edit the story and redraw it and really work on, what I wanted to do. Um, and it was like my first Lori Lovecraft issue, and um, I was working at it on a TV show at the time called Tales from the Crypt.
right. You did a lot of stuff for Tales of the Crypt.
I did all 100 episodes of they did a comic book cover, and like I said, I did all 100 episodes that way. Except John McManus did one, and Dan Spiegel did one
Hmm.
because I was busy at the time and asked them.
You started out doing storyboarding with them, as I recall, and then they needed somebody for the comic book covers, right?
Well, actually, what I did was a series of what they call inspirational drawings.
Ah,
I was doing like a set design. They wanted something for the opening of the show, so I was doing like some set designs of this is what the castle. This is, I did a series of those. Um, and and then I got a call back like a month or two later, and the producer Bill Tytler said, "Hey, you got to come see the sets we built from your designs." So that was pretty much a mind blowing experience for me because I've been doing drawings for years and years, and all of a sudden I'm looking and there's the drawing that I did, except it's a movie set now, and I was pretty impressed until I went up to like tap the brick wall, and it was like, oops, it's canvas, you know. But it was still amazing to seeing your drawings turn into what they were going to use for film. And then Bill said, we're shooting 6 of these, and what we think would be good to open them with is to do a like a regular like an EC comic book cover featuring the stars. Would you be interested in that? So that took me about a nanosecond to go, sure. Um, so that was, and it was a great job because I think they did like about 6 or, anywhere between 6 and 12 of those a year. And they're paying me about 4 times what I would be making in comics. Um, so whenever the new season started, and they told me how many were there. It's like, oh, great. How much, how little do I have to work this year now? Because I can go back and those will carry me over. And also, it gave me the chance to really kind of work on drawing and painting. And um, getting better as an artist. Um, I mean, I've never really tried to sell my paintings per se, just because I enjoy doing them. Um, but I, I I pretty much learned how to paint to force myself to learn how to draw better. Because it gets back to that old comment from Corbin. Are you drawing these things and just drawing an outline around them, or are you trying to make them look like a real person in a real setting in a real room? Um, and that was kind of the next big jump for me, was doing drawings every day where I'm looking and I'm trying to um, use shapes to define other shapes rather than to just to put a line about it. That's what Joe Kubert and Leonard Starr did exceptionally well. The
Negative
majority
space.
of
You can't forget about the negative space when you're designing the
right,
droids.
and but I mean, like most of the guys I knew that were working in comics were still doing that outline.
Hmm.
That was the focus, and really, pretty inking. Um, I think the newer guys that came in, they all brought in some of those things, but they wanted to take it to a new level. What you have to understand about comics in the 50s and 40s and 50s, it was kind of the garbage man's job. It's like if you're going to be an artist, if you couldn't get work anyplace else, you worked in comics. And often you had the job and you didn't even tell your relatives or friends that that's what you did for a living. And because it was the low end of kind of the art totem pole. Um, you could work in advertising, you could work in doing a comic strip, any of those things. Whatever, storyboarding. Those were legitimate art jobs, and you couldn't get those. You went into comics, which explained why there were a lot of blacks and Latinos who worked in comics, because in the 50s, didn't matter how good you weren't going to get a job in advertising, um, or some of the legitimate art things, um, unless you fit the white profile.
Yeah.
So
So let me ask you what you're doing these days. You told me a little earlier that you're basically semi-retired, but you're
well,
still keeping
no, I'm
active.
fully retired. I tell people, they say, well, what do you do now? I'm saying I do the same thing I did every day for the past all of my life, except I don't get paid for it anymore. I do it for fun. Um, I do, like I've done like Lori Lovecraft and Retrowood, and I just had a new one come out this year. I did one that I enjoyed a lot, called Mad Mummy.
Oh,
Some of those, and one I just see if I actually have one here, or well, too many books. My latest is some of my Voodoo Mansion stories. Um, So yeah, they're a little better than Vanity Press. I mean, I think anybody who self publishes in comics will tell you the same thing. It's like if you sell more than 100 copies, you're a success. It's. I always laugh about this because I'm thinking, when I was doing fanzines, I started out selling 175 copies of the first one. And by the time I finished, I'd printed 1,000 copies of the last issue and sold them all. And then I got into comics and I had, an audience of 100,000. I thought, that's really cool. And when I started storyboarding, it was suddenly tens of millions. And and then when I got into live action and Tales from the Crypt, those numbers just kept going up. And I think like the Narnia movies that I worked on, we had over 1 billion people see those things. So now I'm back to drawing my own, comic book stuff. And if I sell 50 or 60 copies, I'm thinking, whoa, what a day.
oh, but you're enjoying it. I mean, you no?
I don't look back at my old Marvel comics. I don't go back and look through them and go, yeah, this is what you're doing. But I mean, I go back and look through my creator-owned comics all the time to look at, like, okay, because for one thing, I'm doing everything: penciling, inking, writing, coloring. Um, uh, Unfortunately, I also do proofreading, and I'm horrible at it.
No, I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so they're labors of love. I mean, it's it's like I've got a box full of these old comics that I did, my little, comics I did as a kid
Hmm.
in my shed in the back, and no way I'm getting rid of those things. I mean, they're special to me. And it's saying, I feel the same thing about my fanzines and um, the creator owned stuff that I do. Um, but I don't have that feeling about yeah, I enjoyed comics and they were great because believe me, I had worked on the line at when I worked, I was in college. I'd worked as a janitor. I'd worked as a school teacher. Um, Drawing comics was fun. It was a lot easier than any of those jobs and paid better. Um, but I didn't have an affinity for drawing Marvel comics. Um, I wanted to draw the real world. I mean, I was much more interested in drawing the real world than I was in kind of the cosmic approach. Uh,
Hmm.
so um,
Street level heroes.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Um, what about what does the future hold for you? I mean,
hopefully there is one.
yeah, there's got to be. Yeah,
Uh,
just keep producing stuff you like, I guess, huh?
I'm working on another. I'm doing a crossover story now because I've got my Retrowood stories, which are all it's kind of a faux Hollywood in the 30s, and it's all about the movie industry.
Oh, I get it. Retro wood. Got it. Okay. Yeah.
And because I was a big fan of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, and I the thing about all my creator-owned comics, they give me the chance to kind of do my own little movies and to cast my favorite actors and actresses in them. So I mean, it's like Lori Lovecraft always had who was it? Um, geez, trying to remember the actress that I used for. I use a bunch of them. There's kind of like Jane Fonda and Catherine Deneuve and Anne Margaret was the one I used the most because for beautiful actresses to try and get them with actual expressions on their faces was difficult. But Anne Margaret had no problem with that. So I mean, when I was working on stories, it was easy to find, her making the expression of being surprised or angry or whatever. Um, but with the latest story I'm working on, I've got my Mad Mummy. Since he's immortal, he actually spent time in the 30s working as a stuntman, on the Mummy movies, of course. Um, so this story is about a love affair that he has, but he breaks it off, and it's like there's a famous actress, Sarah Bernhardt, and she can't understand like, oh, this is perfect romance. What happened? And she tries to locate him years later when he's in Retrowood, and uses my detective to kind of track him down, find out who he is. Well, um, the reason is that for him, he's been on the earth for 3,000 years, and it's like you're going to get old, you're going to die, I'm going to stay the same. The pain of watching you do that for me is going to be tremendous. The pain of you watching me not change is going to be even more tremendous. So, it's like it's easy, it's kinder just to step away.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know whether it is or isn't, not being an immortal. So,
Mhm.
but
There are
it
counter arguments.
gives me a chance to work on a story like that.
Yeah, that's great.
Um,
What about social media? People, presumably you have a presence there. People can see what
oh,
you're up to. No, not at
before I
all.
was on this today, I was doing my post on Facebook, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn, and what's the other one I do? Pinterest. Um, I was on what's it called? X,
Your Twitter?
Twitter, but I divorced myself from that. I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. So and again, it's one of the difficult things. I was just seeing my neighbor today, and his son is a film student. I said, "Hey, tell Raymond to come down. I want to talk with him about a couple things because every time I go out in the world, I'm going, where am I at? It's things have changed so dramatically. I mean, um, it's like I remember doing underground comics, and it was like, wink, wink, we're doing stories about dope. and that. But not that I ever do that. But I mean, it's like it's legal here in California. I was in the what do they call them? The dispensary
Yes, that's what they call
gummies
them.
the other day, um, and I was laughing. I was telling the girl, I said like, in walking in here and imagining like, oh wait, there's a store now that sells pop, or sells pot or whatever. I said the only thing more ridiculous than that is, God, can you imagine a store that sells nothing but comics? And it's like, you're watching that stuff all along. It's like, and I mean, for me, the invention of the VCR and the DVD, it's like it's changed my life in terms of, God, all those great movies that I love that maybe you could catch them once on TV and you were going to have commercials and cuts and all this other stuff. And suddenly in the 80s, it's like you can actually rent these things and watch them and have a collection of them. Um, so I mean, it's uh, just trying to maintain with what's going on, in the world around us uh, is fascinating to look at.
World changes too quickly. I think it's
Or either we stay the same too long. I don't know which.
that it could be both, right? Mike, I want to thank you for being with us today. Is there any last word you'd like to give, some advice to people watching this who might be interested in going into comics?
Uh, don't no. No, it's like comics are the best way to present a visual story, and any 10-year-old kid now has the tools at home to create any of this stuff, to go to YouTube and to educate himself about it. Um, I mean, trying to track that stuff down when I was a kid, the idea like I want to go to a school that teaches me how to draw comics, they'd laugh at you. Now every school has courses in storyboarding, visual storytelling, all of these things. So if you're into it, a educate yourself about it, and secondly, you have a unique vision. Make that your focus. It's great to work for somebody else, but you're only, it's like there is no thrill like what's happened to you. Tell me the story about things, tell me the story about your life.
That's great.
As Mark Twain said, there are no uninteresting lives. Everybody's got something that's going on, and you have a unique vision. You're the only one who can give that to the world.
Well, I think ending with an observation by Mark Twain is a good way to end this. Thank you. Thank you, Mike Vosburg. I want
All
to
right.
encourage everyone who's watching this to like it, because we like Mike, subscribe, and by all means, share this. And
And two things.
yep,
One is send me a link to this when it
we
comes
will.
out. And secondly, anyone who wants to see my work or get in touch with it, they can go to, I'm looking for an ad on the back of these things for, Vozart. Look at, vozart.com.
Ah, all
So
righty.
you can check out my website
And
and
the web address
is vozart dot com.
okay. All right.
It's
Thank
like
you, Mike.
Mozart, except with the V.
Good to see you. I'm
All right.
gonna,
Thank
okay.
you, Dennis. Take care.